The Myanmar line should never be considered as a legal border between China and India by any stretch of the imagination. President Trump demonstrated to the fullest extent of the word that he didn't care about India. Suffice it to say, India needs to maintain its own independence of decision making. Now, you mentioned about China-Indian territorial disputes. Indeed, these disputes are real. The root cause is that for the eastern section of the border between China and India insisted that the Myanmar line, drawn up in the early 1910s by a gentleman called Mr. Myanmar, a British national, working and living in British Indian Empire, should be the border between China and India. Now, from the Chinese perspective, as well as from the British perspective, nobody recognized the Myanmar line as the line between China and India. And as far as relations between China and Britain is concerned, China has by now completely overthrown all the unequal treaties imposed on China by the British Empire. And we took back Hong Kong, which was forced to be ceded to Britain in perpetuity in 1997. Therefore, why should anyone in India really indulge in the fantasy that the Myanmar line should really constitute the border between China and India? Because no one in China ever recognized the Myanmar line. It was not accepted by China throughout the change of governments in China. And therefore, China has been engaging with India about the illegality and the illogicality of the Myanmar line as the border between China and India. And China said that what we call Zhangnan region or South Tibet region should be fully recovered by China in due course. I think it is time for China and India really to engage with each other to talk about these territorial issues and amicably solve the territorial disputes for the benefit of both of China as well as India. Now, if India refuses to do that, refuses to give up the Myanmar line, to give up the Myanmar line as the border between China and India, and to give up the what we call Zhangnan region or South Tibet region back to China, then they may really be faced with a greater specter of, for example, the Ganges River becoming the final border between China and India. I hope neither China nor India will ever go to that length, because I do hope Chinese people and the Indian people have enough wisdom to size up the situation and come to an amicable solution of their border issue. And what China is asking for is completely based on logic, as well as history, as well as all things which can be recognized by international law. And the Myanmar line should never be considered as a legal border between China and India by any stretch of the imagination. The problems now existing between China and India was very much left over by the British Indian Empire. And allow me to mention one thing. This same British Myanmar drawing a line, tried to force that line to become China-Indian border, also went to Palestine, I think, and draw similar lines, which confused a lot of people over there in Palestine, and which was actually one of the root causes for the now very much great disturbance or uncertainty involving Palestine versus Israel, you name it. So I think the British colonists really did lots of bad things, and their impact, their consequences are still being felt in the world of today. Now, China started the economic and political reform and opening to the outside world more or less in 1978. Back in 1978, the size of the Chinese economy and the size of the Indian economy were more or less on par with each other. For 1 or 2 years, India's economic size was even larger than China, and the per capita income of India was larger than China for 1 or 2 years. But by now, China's economic size is about 5 times as big as India. I traveled to India quite frequently before the pandemic, and I can tell you, China today is completely a different country compared with India. China is the largest trading nation in the world, the most important manufacturing country in the world, a country with a complete set of scientific and technological breakthrough, a country with a complete line of productions of everything can be produced as recognized by the United Nations, whereas India, as an important country as it is, remains relatively slow in development, and their power generation, for example, their manufacturing output, and their scientific breakthroughs, for example, still have many rooms for further improvement. Therefore, for the world of today, I don't think India and China are competitors against each other. The world is big enough to accommodate both China and India together. And I think both China and India can learn from each other quite well. Now, for President Trump's manhandling of India in the recent days, I think he did the wrong thing. India is a great country with tremendous amount of power and potentials. And India deserves to be recognized as an equal, to be treated as an equal. And no country, including the United States, should be allowed to dominate above India and try to issue one ultimatum after another to India. In that sense, I think China and India do have sympathies for each other for the maximum pressure applied by the Trump administration against China on the one hand for different reasons, and against India on the other hand for different reasons. I think China and India, both being members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, now need to compare notes more frequently about how they can do. And I think the misperception created by the Biden administration, etc., that India is very much of an ally of the United States, the Quad, for example, created a lot of misimpressions in India that the United States really cared about the economic development and the prosperity of the Indian people. President Trump demonstrated to the fullest extent of the word that he didn't care about India. He treated India as a secondary country, as a country not worthwhile to be treated as an equal on the global scene, or at least as a first-tier country. And that probably hurt the feelings of lots of people in India. And they need to reorient themselves to see the realities about themselves as well as their relative strength vis-a-vis the United States or other major countries in the world. Suffice it to say, India needs to maintain its own independence of decision-making. India has prided itself for decades as a leader of the non-aligned movement, as a leader of the global South, and they should really avoid being tied up on the bandwagon of any other country which may serve the geopolitical agenda of that country rather than for the benefit of the Indian people. In that sense, China and India should engage with each other as equals and talk about as many things as they can for their mutual benefit, for their economic cooperation, and for a synchronized and coordinated strategy against the maximum bullying by Washington against both China and India.